Hello everyone and welcome to Healthy Ireland at your library. This evening we have with us Mary Kate Kelly, who is a counsellor for Cancer Focus Northern Ireland in the Macmillan Support and Information Centre. She is part of the Belfast Trust Cancer Support Service, and Mary Kate is going to talk to me in a question and answer format about a cancer diagnosis, about some of the emotions that may come up as a result of that, some of the psychological impacts of getting that diagnosis, and some ways that you might choose to cope, or some experiences you may have in terms of your reactions to that. So Mary Kate, thank you very much for joining us. You're very, very welcome.
My pleasure, Caroline. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role in the Cancer Support Unit?
Yeah, I suppose I've worked as a counsellor since 1999 with this client group with people impacted by a cancer diagnosis. And for me in my work, that includes family members, because they're also impacted. So that could be the person with the diagnosis or their close family members. And I provide one-to-one counselling as part of a broad team of support services, which would include a wide variety of counsellors throughout Northern Ireland. And also holistic services like complementary therapies, yoga classes, Pilates, and even courses on fatigue or body image. So there's a broad holistic approach, and that could happen in the setting of the centre, or also sometimes for inpatients. And obviously with the pandemic, we've discovered remote support. So that's been quite a big change for us, and a good one in many ways. So that's going to be part of what's going to be part of the offering going forwards.
That's really interesting, and I love the idea of a holistic approach to cancer, and I think that's something we'll come back to a little later on in terms of coping. Maybe if we start off with, could you talk us through the process of receiving an initial diagnosis of cancer? So what kind of information will your doctor give to you, and what kind of information should we ask for if we go to the doctor, you know, with a suspected cancer or cancerous growth or a lump or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Caroline, and it's a big question, because of course the word cancer captures over 100 different diseases, and each one of those cancers will have their own little different types as well. So that's a very big question. The reality is a lot of people get their cancer diagnosis, believe it or not, in A&E, so it can be actually really unexpected. Some people, loads of people will get referred for investigations and will get the relief of not having a diagnosis. So that's the reality, is many people are checked out and go on to not get a diagnosis, but get it confirmed that actually it's something else. It's not cancer. So for the people who do go on to get the diagnosis, there can be a real difference in their experiences. Maybe it was done in a controlled way. You know, it was part of a screening program, well managed, with a doctor and nurse who had really good people skills. Or it might have happened in a more haphazard way, and I'm being kind when I say that. Unfortunately, that can still happen because medically trained staff are still just people. So quite often when I'm working with people, I will be looking to see what their diagnosis experience was like. For a lot of people, hearing your name in a sentence with the word cancer is profoundly shocking. For some people, it's actually a relief, because maybe they were worried for quite a long time, and this confirms what they were already suspecting and worrying about. The initial diagnosis, there may not be a lot of information. They might still need to do lots of tests, and that's tough, because we like certainty. We like to know what's going to happen next. And the doctor might be telling you, look, we know it's cancer, but we need to do some other investigations to find out what type, or you need surgery, and then we can analyze what happens after surgery. So rather than people getting all the information in one go, think of it like staged pieces of information. As the medical team get access to the information, they will share it with you. But if they say they don't know, it's probably because they don't know. And that can leave people feeling frightened, helpless. And certainly with the pandemic, if there was somebody with them to hear that support. Sometimes in the pandemic, people got their diagnoses on their own. And that's been really, really tough. So the aftermath of the diagnosis, in many ways, it's just taking a breath, getting home safely. If you're not feeling safe to drive, phone somebody, get someone to drive you home if you ended up going there on your own. Be open to the idea that you might feel sad, frightened, maybe even angry, depending on the circumstances. Maybe you spent ages fighting to get your appointments. You know, there's so many different scenarios that I could spend half an hour describing them all to you, because everybody's individual and unique. But the one thing to take away from it is whatever you feel, you're entitled to feel what you're feeling.
Okay. And, you know, I suppose feeling what you're feeling is a key element of that. So what are some common physical or psychological responses to receiving a diagnosis?
Well, again, if you think about it, everybody is a unique individual with their own life circumstance before they get to that point of diagnosis. So are you a single parent struggling on quite a tough job? Are you reasonably financially comfortable with loads of social support? Those are going to be two very different experiences. Maybe you're caring for two elderly parents, because people have complicated lives. And those people are the people who are going in to get diagnoses. Maybe you've been traumatized by losses in your past, and this can really rattle all that up again. So some people, if their coping style is to go straight into denial, there's nothing wrong with that, provided they keep in contact with their medical team and stay in contact with them. Quite often then what might happen is that their family members don't cope well with the person not really wanting to talk about it. But then the family members need to go and get support, if that makes sense. The person in the center of the storm, which is the person with the diagnosis, they're allowed to react to this in whatever way works for them. So if denial works, that's fine. If jigsaws work, that's also fine. If breaking a couple of vases that you didn't like in the garage works, that's also fine. So whatever emotions come out, it's probably something to do with your own individuality and your own coping styles that are already there. But if life has already been hard for you before this happened, then you might already be feeling extra vulnerable. And that's where counsellors, people like me, and the services that are there come in. Equally, you could be surrounded by family members who love you dearly, but they are too frightened to have that conversation with you. And sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger and just offload so you can go back to your life and sort of box it off. So there's no right or wrong way. Do you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think you've brought up a key point as well. Sometimes it's not as easy to tell family. Like, you may actually cope with the diagnosis yourself and be able to kind of go, okay, it's what I was expecting.
Yep. And
you're psychologically prepared for it, but you may not be prepared to have that conversation with friends or family. And I think that can be one of the challenges, is anticipating, or maybe not, but our expectations around how family or friends will receive the information can also determine how comfortable or otherwise we are in telling them things. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions around how people could approach that if they have concerns about how their family may react?
Well, it's never going to be easy telling somebody you love, or that somebody who's a part of your family, that something really big has happened for you. And a cancer diagnosis is a big thing. So it's almost like, give yourself a moment to breathe, and at some point find the time to tell somebody, because realistically, to keep something really big hidden takes a lot of energy, and all your energy is already taken up with coping with this experience. So it's okay to tell one or two people. And remember, families can have complicated relationships too. So if your family is pulling together and everything's going great, it'll probably be easy. If your family's complicated and there's a lot of issues, it might be less easy. But picking the one person in your circle, and you can even almost make them like an informal spokesperson. I give you permission to tell everybody. But the bare minimum, people don't need people don't have a right to your information. And sometimes people forget that, and they can ask questions out of absolute concern. And I'm always telling clients, it's okay to say, thank you so much for asking. I really appreciate your concern. But you don't have to share everything with everybody, because you'll end up feeling exhausted. So your job isn't to look after everyone. But if you tell no one, then you can end up feeling really isolated. And that's not really a realistic plan. It's about picking out a few people that you can trust. And again, with mobile phones, if you end up getting loads of messages, that can be really wearing. So talking through family members and even getting them to field that kind of energy can be really helpful, so that you can keep your energy for yourself, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. I think there are support groups for people who've been through cancer, who've come out the other end. Are there maybe supports that are there for people on receiving a diagnosis? Say someone now who mightn't have a lot of family around, or who maybe doesn't have a good relationship with their family.
Yeah. So, for example, now the Irish Cancer Society, they have a fantastic website and counselling service. You've also got Cancer Care West, and there's a whole list of local organisations right throughout Sligo, Galway, Mayo, where people can access counselling and complementary therapies local to them. And equally, you can phone up. I think there's a helpline on the Irish Cancer Society website. So at any point, and I know certainly for our service, people can self-refer. People can always reach out for help. It's not going to be the case that somebody's going to say, oh, no. People are waiting there to provide the support. If you happen to find yourself in a position where you're feeling really isolated and that you can't talk to people, even if you're surrounded by people who love you. So it's not about whether or not people are there. It's about whether or not you feel able to talk about the things that are maybe bubbling up inside. Yeah.
That's a really good point too, that it's not just for people who might be separate from their families or maybe not in a good relationship, but that even when you are surrounded by family and friends who love you and want to support you, sometimes it is a stranger who can help, because you can talk to them about the fears and concerns that you have for yourself that you mightn't be able to express to a family member. And also that you can talk about concerns that you may have about your family, depending on the diagnosis. I mean, obviously, if you receive a diagnosis that you're going to have, for example, you may need a mastectomy. Mm-hmm. The concerns you may have may be very different than if you're told, I'm really sorry, it's too late, you're now at end stage, and you suddenly have to start making plans for your family and how they're going to be looked after. I suppose, stepping back from the dreadful scenario at the end, but sometimes people just have an initial fear of even going for the test, because they're afraid of getting a diagnosis. What kind of tips or coping strategies or encouragement would you give to someone who is anticipating or suspects they may have cancer, but maybe hasn't yet worked up the nerve to talk to their healthcare professional?
Yeah, and I think that's a real thing. And I know when I first started working, and certainly when I was growing up, cancer wasn't a word that you would have routinely heard. People had so much fear. They would have talked about the big C or a short illness. They wouldn't even use the word because there was that much fear for it. And I think there's a bit of a hangover with that. Okay, we give it the kind of almost like a superstitious quality, whereas the reality is there's so many tests that doctors can do. They're busy ruling out all these things. So it's almost like for most people, when they're getting investigations, it's to rule out things. So getting to your doctor early and quickly, let them do the medical thinking. That's what they've done all their training for. So we can let them do all the medical stuff. trust the system while also being reasonably proactive if you feel something has gone too long. So it's always okay to lift the phone and say, just checking up, following up on that. Most people will just be more than happy to update you on what's happening for you. And the vast majority of people won't be getting a diagnosis for a lot of the investigations, right?
Yes.
Now, the reality is, at the moment, there was a study done in 2019, Mullen et al., and it's 4% of the Irish population is currently designated as cancer survivors. And that's predicted to double by 2045. So that's a lot of people, 8% of the population, and then all their family members. And what's different now is that these are cancer survivors. And of course, that language has its own problems. And the National Cancer Strategy has prioritised from 2017 to 2026 the survivorship experience, because so many people now will have the experience of getting a diagnosis and then having to live as cancer survivors, right, after that. Now, that's a complicated term because very few people can agree what they really mean by that. But what it does mean, because you said earlier on, out the other side or at the end
Yes.
of.
Yes.
And for some people, that's a strange notion, because I often think it's a bit like you were in your life and then the diagnosis comes along, pulls the rug out from under you. You find yourself in a whole new life that you never asked for. Nobody got your permission to do this. But here you are. And you have to deal with treatments. You have to deal with other people and how they're reacting to you or not. Ongoing caring responsibilities in your own life, financial impacts. And our culture has two big stories that you'll hear about cancer. And a lot of it's to do with fundraising and a lot of charitable work. And one is the inspirational, shiny person. So you've had cancer and now you're going to rollerblade through the rest of your life, sprinkling inspiration as you go and cheering everybody up all the time. No pressure. No pressure at all. Nobody could ever live up to that shiny, inspirational role fantasy. And then the other one is grey sort of tones, cello music, and oh dear, they're dead, right? And I'm not saying that those people don't exist, but what I am saying is there's a load of people in the middle who are living with, who maybe went through all their treatments, are in remission, but have to go for regular checkups. And every time they go, they're anxious because that's normal. I often talk about the invisible legacy of cancer is before you got your diagnosis, if you had a pain in your back, you thought, oh, did I do something in the garden? But after a cancer diagnosis, your mind will always say, is that something to do with cancer? Did I do something in the garden? It's just part of what's left behind for people. And that's one of the most commonly reported legacies is fears of recurrence, because we have really clever brains that like to look out for danger. So that's natural and normal, except in our culture, we don't really acknowledge that.
I think that that's a very fair point. I mean, it is very much the story that goes out is, you know, when we think about it in the media, it's always these wonderfully inspirational people, or as you say, it's so-and-so died of cancer. And that's it. There's very little of the, you know, ongoing living with, living through.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a challenge for people because it almost sends the message that it's not okay to have emotions around it, you know, that you're expected to be upbeat, and there's this message of, you know, fighting cancer, beating cancer, and somehow if you don't, that it's almost like it's your fault. Well, you didn't fight hard enough, you didn't, you know, and that is, I think, damaging is the wrong word maybe, but it's not helpful. I think it puts a lot of pressure on people that, you know, we need to say it's okay. It's okay to feel rage and grief and anger and, you know, to burst into tears for no reason, because that's what grief does. It hits you like a wave and said, you know, my life has been turned upside down. I don't know how to cope with this. And you know what? It's perfectly fine. It's okay for you to have those feelings and say, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we are friends and family of someone with cancer, how can we help? What's the best thing? Like, what do your patients say to you that they find helpful, or that they wish their family or friends would do or not do?
Yeah. And that's a big question as well, Caroline, because obviously there's loads of people that I never see. So everybody who doesn't come from counselling, I don't see them. Okay. So what I hear from the people who do come from counselling, what's really helpful is if you can follow their lead, right? So if they're telling you, I don't want to talk about this right now, believe them. Talk about something else. That's okay. If they're saying, I really want to talk about this right now, allow them to, if you can at all. And if you can't, own that that's, look, I'm not coping very well with this conversation, but own that it's yours, it's not theirs. I think the emotional burden that's handed to people around the illness of cancer is very particular. And that emotion, there's always a subtle underlying blame going on, which is really unhelpful. We tend not to say to people with arthritis, oh no, what did you do to bring this on yourself? Or imply it in any way. And yet with cancer, there's a lot of very strange noise going around. And it's all very two-dimensional. It would be like watching a Disney movie and thinking, like Cinderella, and thinking, well, that's what love is. It's not. That's a sort of a very particular story. But life is more complicated than that. So if the person says, I'd like to take a nap, let them. And don't continually, people sometimes get really exhausted when people say, just let me know what I can do. Let me know what I can do. And again, there's great intentions behind that question. But what that does is it hands the person who's already dealing with loads of stuff another job to do. Now I have to think, to let them know what to do. So it is a balancing act, and it's okay to get it wrong. And it's okay to say, I'm sorry, I thought when I was dropping off that lasagna that was a helpful thing to do. And now I find out you hate lasagna, So it's okay for you to make mistakes, own it, and ask for them to just sort of follow in their lead to a degree, but not asking them to do all the thinking work.
Yes.
Yeah. There's so many different things that people don't think about. If somebody is dealing with fatigue, don't expect them to do everything that they did before this happened, right? If they get fatigued quicker, take regular breaks for a cup of coffee, let them deal with their fatigue. That's not no reflection on you. They're just maybe physically changed by the treatments that they've gone through.
Yes.
And sometimes if you haven't had an experience of fatigue, that's hard to understand. But if they're telling you they're tired and that they're dealing with fatigue, believe them.
Okay. I think that's really good too. And it's nice to hear. I think sometimes we tend to be so focused on, almost we have to be able to find a solution. And because it's cancer, you feel, well, I can't.
Yeah. We feel helpless.
We feel helpless. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And if there's no way to find a solution to this, Caroline, and the person, it'd be great if we could find a solution. There isn't one. To me, the key thing is that people don't get left alone with this experience, because feeling isolated is probably, as well as fears of recurrence, those are two really common and strong experiences. And you talked about support groups. Support groups can be really helpful if you're feeling really isolated in your experience. So maybe for you, it would be great to connect with other people of your age with that type of cancer. For the next person, it might not be. So there's no right or wrong. There's just whatever works for that particular person. And them, I suppose, reminding themselves, if it works for me, that's good enough.
Yes.
They don't have to justify themselves to other people in that way.
Yeah. And good enough, I think, is something we're not necessarily good at accepting either. We expect perfection, or everything has to work out beautifully, or it has to make me feel wonderful. And maybe it just has to make you feel less bad. Maybe it just has to say, okay, I can cope for today. and all I've got to do is get through today.
Or maybe today's not a good day, and maybe today any semblance of coping is out the window, because before a diagnosis, people have good days and bad days. They have problems and joys in life. And after diagnosis, that's going to happen too. But on top of that, a lot of people are having to deal with treatment. So if you're going through a cycle of chemotherapy, there's going to be days when they're not good days. And it's almost reminding yourself, okay, this is what's happening today. This will pass, but you're not right now. This isn't any fun at all. Somebody turning up and saying, oh, sure, be positive. I mean, that's just the most pointless activity. And I think a lot of people, we came from a time of absolute silence around cancer. Certainly in Ireland, that was my experience growing up in Mayo. There was nothing said. So we didn't know what to say because nobody said anything out of fear. And now people have learned a certain selection of sentences that they think are helpful. Like, oh, be positive. Are you okay? And of course, the are you okay is like, because the answer better be yes. You know?
Right, yes.
Right? Because everybody's scared. And it's okay, I think, to say, I'm so sorry you're going through this. I really wish you didn't have to go through this. And I know I've just said, don't keep asking people if there's anything I can do. Depending on your relationship, you can say, look, can I take the kids on Friday for 2 hours? That way you can get a nap. With the openness that if they say, no, I'm actually quite enjoying their company, that you're open to that. You're not forcing your help on them.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does very much so. I think, you know, one of the things maybe that comes up as well is the grief that comes with a diagnosis. So it's not just, you know, oh my God, I've got cancer and, you know, I have this fear of dying, but there's also maybe the dreams you had for the future or decisions that you made previously. And with the cancer diagnosis, you suddenly look back and go, oh God, I wish I had done something differently. I wish, you know, that there's almost a regret for the path not taken, or the potential that, you know, you may not see things that you had planned. You know, you had planned you were going to live for the next 40 years, because we all do. We think we're going to live forever. And then all of a sudden you're getting this diagnosis, and suddenly things that you had put on the long finger have suddenly taken on an urgency that you didn't think they would have. You know, there's that trip I wanted to take, or that family member that I haven't spoken to, and I need to, you know, make arrangements, or whatever it is that's coming up for people. But it is a type of grief. It has the same sensations as when you experience the loss of a friend or a family member. Do you have any advice for someone who's experiencing that kind of grief? You know, that sort of anticipation of loss of future plans or things like that. Is that something you counsel people through? And if so, you know, what advice do you give them?
Yeah, I don't give a lot of advice. Yeah, I know. And that's because there's a wonderful man called Alan Wolfelt, and he said a sentence, cancer causes loss. Loss results in grieving, and grief requires mourning. And that to me captures so much of it. Some things you're talking about, looking to the past and that sense of regret and old losses that maybe come up again. And they can need looked at, and maybe that influences how you're feeling in the here and now. Then there's also losses in the here and now. Maybe this ends up with you losing the ability to work. Can be a reality for some people. And then there's financial losses. So it's not even just the emotional losses. There's all these multi-layered losses. And then there's the future losses that you're talking about. And the strange reality is, yes, we could all plan to live for another 40 years. Our plans mean nothing. And we live in a culture that really encourages us to imagine that we're all immortal. That's the constant mood music. Cancer is a hard slap in the face that reminds you that actually we're all incredibly mortal. and we're all walking around in bodies that are miracles of fragility all the time. And what can be particular then about cancer is, unlike, like say with COVID, a virus that's coming from somebody else or outside, cancer's happening in our own bodies. So it can really shake our trust in our own bodies, and we've nowhere else to be but be in our own bodies. So there can be a grief of a loss of safety. How do I ever feel safe again in my body? Am I feeling angry with my body? If I pray really hard, it'll all be okay, you know. And these are all processes that everybody needs to go through in their own way. It's going to be different from person to person. If prayer brings you to a place of comfort and reassurance, that's great. If you somehow believe that your cancer is a punishment from God, that's not a very comforting meaning, right? Mm-hmm. So you can see how your spirituality could either be a source of comfort or a desperate burden, right? So it's not even what you're doing, but it's the why. Okay. So there's this big process of grieving the life that has been whipped away from you, trying to then get through treatments, which are really difficult. I don't know that I've ever met anybody who said, oh, that was dead easy, right? And they're being done for a good reason, but that doesn't make the experience any less difficult. And then finding a way to get back into life as a different person because of what you've been through. And that all just takes a bit of time. You know, people think, oh, it's 4 weeks after treatment finished, I should be okay by now. As if that's a reasonable expectation. And it's almost like a really big event takes a very long time to sort of echo through your being. So give it the time. Take a few seasons to make sense of what's happened to you. And you're the person who's going to make sense. Nobody else gets to tell you what this means for you.
You mentioned the, you know, feeling safe in your body. And I think that's actually a really interesting concept, because it is almost like your body has let you down somehow. You know, it's like, here I am. I thought I was perfect. And all of a sudden, you know, and I'm going to say this as a woman, you know, I'm looking at my breast going, all of a sudden there's a lump, it's got to go. And, you know, that's hugely traumatic for any person to receive a diagnosis. But I think for women, in relation to breast cancer, you know, the diagnosis where it means a mastectomy or a double mastectomy is required has a huge impact on self-image, because it's so bound up in, you know, the, let's say, cultural expectations of femininity. You know, this is where your femaleness resides almost, even though it isn't, but, you know, there is that perception. What, in your experience, are the most common concerns that women have before or after mastectomies?
Well, I'll lead off with my little soapbox that, of course, breast cancer affects both women and men. And for a man, it's different issues, but the level of focus on women's experience, which is unusual because usually it's men's experience getting prioritized, can be incredibly isolating for men and demasculinizing. Do you know, oh, breast cancer, you're a man. So I'm just going to pin that up there, that men also deal with breast cancer. Now, for women, everything that you've said, our culture views breasts as a part of femininity, and of course they're visual for most people. There's a shape that they can see under the jumper, and that's the big anxiety. Another service that's a part of Cancer Focus is the bra fitting service, and that's about women getting bras that really work for them and fitted, and whether they go down the route of reconstruction or a prosthesis that pops into the bra, that's all looked at. So this is this big, long physical process. And then depending on which surgery a woman would choose, that has implications for how long that whole physical process would last. There's the pain of recovery. You know, this is surgery. There can be a loss of sensation or a loss of a nipple. And then we associate all of those things with sexuality, attractiveness. There can be an impact on intimate relationships if you're in one. Some women might start to avoid even looking at themselves in the mirror. How do I buy a swimsuit? Even though there are specialised swimsuits out there. Some women choose not to go for reconstruction at all, and that's okay. So it's about making a decision in that moment that's right for you. We're just past October there, and October has turned into, I've heard some women talk about it, pink washing. And it's always Barbie pink, like. And it's, I'm not sure, well, I have lots of thoughts about what that's about, but I don't know that any of it is necessarily about the realities of what it's like to go through breast cancer. So there's a lot of complicated noise in our culture when it comes to all types of cancer, and breast cancer is one of them. So it's almost like, okay, you've had breast cancer, but let's get you all clammed up and back on the horse. And yeah, I don't know how often that's very helpful. Now, for some women it is, but if you're not one of those women, it's okay to say, that's not for me. I'm going to go down this other road here that actually makes way more sense to me.
And I think that the pink, it is of itself, as you say, it's the Barbie pink. It's the, everything is shiny, happy, everything is wonderful, everything can be fixed with an application of nail polish and some glitter, and you know, that's not the reality for an awful lot of people. In fact, it's actually having the opposite effect, because what it's saying is you should be feeling all these wonderful things, and look at us, we're doing all this wonderful stuff, but you know, you feel miserable, you want to hide in a corner and go, yeah, but I don't feel like that. I've had surgery, I feel miserable, I just want to go and curl up and everyone leave me alone, please, thank you.
And it's somehow, I think, having permission to feel whatever it is you're feeling. So if a woman actually is feeling, you know, something sparkly and a bit of lipstick is just gonna, that works for me. But if the next woman is saying, I want my comfy slippers, I don't want to see anything sparkly, both of those women are right. Do you know, it's the permission to just react in the way that works for you, whether that's the pink sparkly or whether that's, no, I don't want the pink sparkly, thank you very much. Rather than continually expecting people to all feel the one way. We're all individuals, and it doesn't change after a cancer diagnosis.
That's very much, I think, in line with you said earlier about, you know, holistic approach, which is very much about the focus on what works for an individual, you know, treating not just the actual, the cancer, but the whole person, you know, body and spirit and emotions and everything else. Now, you mentioned, you know, complementary therapies, and those are not so widely used down here. There's still a lot of focus on, you know, the medical side, and you have your chemo and, you know, you do all of those things. What kind of complementary therapies are in use in Northern Ireland, and, you know, what kind of things might be useful for someone here to try themselves, even if it's not available to the health service?
And you will find, and certainly you can ask with the Irish Cancer Society and with Cancer Care West, that a lot of the local agencies here are working holistically and do have some complementary therapies on offer. So please do investigate that. I'm passionate about the complementary therapy side because I've always worked alongside them. And I believe myself that whenever people have been put through medical trauma of being poked, injected, needles, scalpels, that to have somebody, the simple act of somebody physically touching you in a way that's caring is profoundly important on a physical level for the body. Never mind everything that they know about just relaxation. And so, yeah. So things like reflexology, massage, there's different techniques. There's a whole load of different things. And then there's also, if people develop, so for some women, not all, who have a mastectomy, they could go on to develop lymphedema. So there's a type of massage called manual lymphatic drainage, and that's also very important. So I'm a great believer in find out what's available, ask the Irish Cancer Society, ask Cancer Care West. And if it's not available, start asking, can we get this? Can we get this? Can we get this? Because that's how services come about, is people say, I would quite like this, please. But I do think there's a lot of stuff out there already. There's stuff online that can be looked at Facebook Live. I mean, the Belfast Trust, you can log on to Facebook Live. They've got yoga classes, Pilates, and anybody can look at that. You don't need to be living there. And I'm sure there's a whole host of other stuff online that you can take part in, and programs around managing fatigue, coping with fatigue. And that's really important. So this is where the internet is our friend. You can actually access stuff from the comfort of your own home. It's much more interactive now that we've all discovered video.
Yes, very much so. And I think that's one of the best things that has come out of the pandemic, is the level of comfort that people now have with using video technology and doing classes at home, or, you know, attending webinars. And I know, you know, a lot of us are suffering from webinar fatigue at this point, but at the same time, it has opened up access to a lot of people where you mightn't be able to travel. There might have been financial costs before, but now it's freely available.
Yeah,
you
caring responsibilities.
Yes, you know, you can try out different things, and it's only, you know, an hour of your time, because you don't have to travel to a gym or, you know, wherever it was, some conference center or anything like that. You can learn about all of these new things. You can see what works for you, and, you know, dip in and out of different things. One of the, I suppose, less helpful things is that there's also a lot of information online which is not medically or clinically helpful or accurate or even legitimate. Where do you advise clients to look for information if they are researching?
Yeah, and this is a very important point, because there's information online that is deeply unreliable, and there's two categories. Some of those sites they're deeply unreliable because they genuinely believe it. They genuinely believe that this is true, but it's not true. Other people, they're maliciously trying to make money out of people fraudulently. So those are the two categories. So be really cautious. The internet's great for information, but only reliable information. And this is where the Irish Cancer Society, they have a great website. I'm going to go back to that again, because there's loads of stuff online that's maybe UK based, America based. I'm a great believer in the information needs to be relevant, you know, because if it's available in America, it doesn't matter if you're sitting in Moycullen. There's no doubt that currently in Ireland, and I'm trying to think what they said, it was the National Cancer Strategy, they've acknowledged that currently the resources in Ireland are inadequate for people who are dealing with the survivorship experience. So we're not there yet. And they're trying to put it into place. And then part of that is people putting their hands up and saying, I would quite like this, please. You know, another service that we have up in Cancer Focus is art therapy. I also think that's a fantastic intervention. Craft-based activities. It doesn't all have to be therapeutic. There's a Sing for Life choir. There's dragon boat racing for women. Believe it or not, with lymphedema, rowing can be really helpful. So it's always okay to ring up somewhere like the Irish Cancer Society and say, look, I've got this information. Is it real? Is it legitimate? And they will be able to let you know, because they will have looked into it. That's
great. Thank you very much, Mary Kate. So I think we'll call it a day there. I think you've left it on a really nice note of, you know, where to look for useful and accurate and timely information. If you're dealing with a cancer diagnosis. For everyone who's watching, if you want more information, as Mary Kate has said, the Irish Cancer Society
and Cancer Care West.
And Cancer Care West. There are also materials available from the library in relation to both cancer diagnosis. There are books on diet. There are also a number of items in our collection on depression, anxiety, and other emotions and experiences that you may be having as a result of a diagnosis. So we encourage you to either drop into the library for resources, or you can access them on BorrowBox, which offers you ebooks and audiobooks on different topics. So thank you very much, Mary Kate, for being with us this evening, for giving all this wonderful guidance, for talking us through all of the different aspects. And as you say, it is a very broad topic. We really only touched on, you know, the very high level aspects, but hopefully it's been helpful for anyone who's watching. It's given you an indication of the challenges, the issues, and also given you permission to feel and to grieve and to be okay with not being okay. So thank you all. Thank you, Mary Kate, and please keep an eye out on our Facebook and YouTube channels for our next Healthy Ireland video, which will be coming soon. Thank you.
Thank you.